Welcome to Tawad Lab's Policy Roundtable. My name is Amber Shamsi. I'm head of communications at Tawad Lab, and today we're talking about the ceasefire announced at the end of February between India and Pakistan. It came as a surprise for many people, and there's been some speculation on how and why it came about. There's been talk about back-channel talks, who was conducting these back-channel talks, the implications and the significance of this, as well as whether there's any link between the understanding that China and India reached, as well as the uncertainty at Pakistan's western border with Afghanistan and the peace deal. To talk about all of these issues, we have a fantastic panel. We have Happymon Jacob, who's an associate professor at the School of International Studies at JNU, and author of The Line of Control, Traveling with the Pakistan and Indian Armies. You know, one of the few journalists, perhaps, or academics who've seen both sides of the line of control and has traveled with both, as the book says as well. We also are very fortunate to have Zahid Hussain, who's a journalist and an author and a columnist, vast experience in covering issues between India and Pakistan. We also have Asfandyar, who is a postdoctoral fellow at Stanford University. A warm welcome to all of you. And I'd like to begin with Zahid Hussain, because I think one of the interesting things that I've noticed, because when the ceasefire was announced and came into effect between the midnight, 24th, 25th February, it felt like a bit of a surprise. And interestingly, while there was some discussion in the Pakistani media, not as much as I'd expected, because it is quite significant.
Amber, yes, actually it came as an utter surprise to all of us when it was announced. And there was no indication as such actually that this could happen. And particularly nobody expected any movement in India-Pakistan relations in this atmosphere. So yes, it was a surprising and development, and somehow actually a very positive one. It is basically the revival of 2003, a ceasefire understanding, which has been revived. And we have seen that 2003 to up to 2010, it had worked quite well, but after that, we all know what happened. Actually, since the announcement of this development and the meeting between the Director General Military Operation of the two militaries, things have calmed down, certainly. Guns are quiet now, but a big question mark is still hanging. How long can it continue? Because when we see actually what happened in 2003, it also followed by a kind of a back channel talks between India and Pakistan, on very substantive talks. We all remember what happened between 2004 and 2007. There was a ceasefire. Also worked because there was kind of contact between the two countries, and very constructive dialogue was going on, although in back channel, and it seemed that something would have come out with that. But now actually this has happened in a completely different atmosphere, where there's no indication still that the two countries are going to enter into any kind of negotiation on substantive issues, or structured dialogue, or even back channel diplomacy. So that is basically a big question mark, that in this kind of atmosphere, how long can this agreement survive? That's one thing. But saying all that, it could have not happened without some kind of back channel contact between two countries. So one still does not know whether there is still that back channel working on other substantive issues. So the other issues that I don't see any hope, still some hope that even the two countries even will restore full diplomatic relationship. There's no indication as such. So in isolation, ceasefire could not work for a long time, unless there is a development on other issues too. So some confidence building measure has to be taken. And so I don't know if my Indian friends know about any other development, but so here actually we have not heard anything happening like this. And in fact, actually, it's quite interesting that I read a lot about this development in Indian press than in Pakistani press. In fact, actually, the officials here are muted on that issue. Whatever is coming out in Indian press seems to be much more coming from off the record talks. And I don't, so there are many questions. There's positive development. Everybody feels that finally some thaw has happened, but how long can it survive? That's a big question mark.
Timing has also been very interesting. It wasn't just a surprise. It was also just on the eve of the second anniversary of the Balakot airstrike. India and China had also reached an agreement along the LAC. How were things viewed in India?
First of all, to begin, let me completely agree with Zahid that while this is clearly a very welcome development that we have a ceasefire on the line of control, which I am sure is perhaps one of the most significant military measures in over 18 years since 2003. So this is clearly a very significant development. At the same time, as Zahid correctly pointed out, the question is whether this can sustain itself, whether this ceasefire will endure the test of time if there is no conversation, broad-based conversation between India and Pakistan or some of the other issues. And historical evidence testifies that the India-Pakistan ceasefire has survived or endured when you have had conversations on all the other issues, including the mother of all India-Pakistan conflicts, Kashmir. You look at the 2003 ceasefire agreement, 2003 November ceasefire agreement, which actually brought peace and stability to the subcontinent from 2004 up to about late 2007, 2008. And one of the reasons why you had a stability and peace between the two sides in the wake of the ceasefire was because this was followed by a slew of conversations between India and Pakistan in the back channel on the Kashmir issue. The back channel, as we know it, between Mr. Lamba and Tariq Aziz on the Pakistani side. So I completely sort of agree with that. This is a tactical measure, and if it needs to sort of survive and endure in the longer term, this needs to become more comprehensive in nature. Now, but coming back to Amber, the question that you asked about how this is seen in India. So far, I think this is widely seen as a tactical measure, as I pointed out earlier on, not as sort of constituting a piece in the larger peace puzzle, between bilateral peace puzzle, as it were. And I think there is a certain realization in India, I think at least strategic community, that it is not possible for India to have two fronts open at the same time, which is Pakistan and China. So we have now a disengagement process that is on the line of active control, and this process on the line of control with Pakistan actually ensure that the two sides have now become pacified to some extent. One doesn't know how long this is going to last. There is also a recognition or feeling in India that there has been some nudging from the Biden administration in the United States to both India and Pakistan to sort of come back to the negotiating table between the two sides, at least in a tactical sense of the term. I think the unfolding situation in Afghanistan requires for the Americans to have a certain amount of calm in the region geopolitical theater, as it were. And I think it sort of suits all parties involved, be it Pakistan, India, United States, in the international community in general. I think this suits everybody. So I think this is a good beginning, if I may sort of put it that way. But it's just a beginning. We need to, I think, wait and see whether the two sides, through the back channel or the front channel, will be able to carry on this conversation to the next level. Just one more point, but before I finish, even the ceasefire agreement itself really is only a conversation between the telephone conversation between the two director generals of military operations, right? I mean, there is no written agreement. The 2003 ceasefire agreement itself is a reiteration of the 1972 Shimla agreement. So the do's and don'ts, the principles, the norms that should govern a proper ceasefire have not yet been put into place. I think the next step, if you ask me, should be writing down the ceasefire agreement rather than trying to observe a ceasefire agreement that is orally agreed upon.
Okay, so here's an interesting point that you've raised there, and Asfandyar, I'm going to come to you as well on this. There has been speculation and discussion as well, new administration coming in, Afghanistan is unsettled, it suits everybody, but it also suits India and Pakistan as well. So, you know, everybody agrees that there needs to be a ceasefire. The question here is that the escalation in terms of, you know, fire across both borders happened post 2014. There are really no guarantees that this will last. Will the Biden administration ensure that this lasts until something is done on Afghanistan? I mean, you can take the long view on this, since you're sitting elsewhere.
Sure. So, you know, that's an important point. What is the cause of this thaw? So if you try to trace Indian policy towards Pakistan over the last 5 to 7 years, there are really two key periods. You know, starting from 2014, after the government of Prime Minister Modi comes into power, there was a period of engagement with Pakistan, specifically with the government of Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif went to the inauguration of Prime Minister Modi, and even though there was a sort of a spoiler incident in the form of an attack by Lashkar-e-Taiba on the Indian consulate in Herat, I think the Indian government at the time took that in its stride and you know, maintained engagement with Pakistan. The next major event we saw was Prime Minister Modi going to Lahore in December 2015, and then the process collapsed in early 2016 with the Pathankot attacks. And from that point onward, what you really see is India putting in place a concerted effort at coercing Pakistan, mounting, in my view, you know, one of the longest stretches of a coerced Pakistan policy, in an attempt to change Pakistani behavior along a number of different dimensions, ranging from Pakistan's claim on Kashmir, Pakistan's support for separatism in Kashmir, and then finally the use of violence in Kashmir as well as mainland India. And a key assumption in that Indian policy was that the Indian government was going to synergize, you know, coercive efforts of the U.S. government, which was separately having problems with Pakistan at the time. So, you know, late 2016, 2017 was a very difficult time in the U.S.-Pakistan relationship. You know, by August 2017, you can say that the U.S.-Pakistan relationship nearly collapsed. The United States government started putting sanctions on the table. However, by 2018, we see the US government starting to pull back due to the events in Afghanistan. The US government has a change of heart on what it wants to do in Afghanistan. And as a result of that, I think the Indian government, you know, Indian policymakers almost feel like a key assumption, a key strand of their coerced Pakistan policy has sort of fallen by the wayside. And I think if you look carefully over the last 18 months or so, the Indian government had been sort of rethinking its coerced Pakistan policy, and then finally over the last year, with the increasing Chinese pressure, with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, clearly Indian government has been stretched in a number of ways, and has decided to revisit its coerced Pakistan policy. We can also talk about Pakistan's logic, but by and large, Pakistan has been strategically constrained for the last 6 to 7 years. Pakistan has been looking for some kind of strategic respite, either from the US or on its eastern border. I think Pakistan has been in a largely defensive mode, notwithstanding the rhetoric of the leadership on Kashmir or on some of the other issues. So I'm not so surprised by why Pakistan has agreed to the ceasefire. I think the the Indian change of heart is more interesting and more meaningful. And in some ways, I'm interested in finding out who the third party here is. I don't think it's the U.S. I also don't think it's China. My sense is it's most probably a Middle Eastern country. One reason for that is that Gulf states have not been happy with the choice that they have had to make over the last few years between India and Pakistan at key forums like OIC. And so my sense is that the push is kind of coming from there.
That's an interesting theory that it's coming from the Middle East. But I think, Zahid Saab, I'd like to speak to you about the fact that we also naturally saw, because there has been a lot of rhetoric from the Imran Khan government, likening Modi's government to Hitler's government, and pushing on Kashmir, and then there's obviously a lot of talk about raising Kashmir at United Nations forums as well. But since the ceasefire, we've also seen a dialing down of that rhetoric. Does that also mean that potentially Pakistan has also decided to step back a little in hopes of a more sort of comprehensive dialogue? I know you said that there doesn't seem to be anything in the sort of air at the moment, but could there potentially be some recognition that we cannot continue like this?
Well, it's very clear that that rhetoric you are mentioning about has come down. It was from both sides, but certainly Imran Khan has also been using that word, which generally diplomatically we have not seen. But there has been actually change in tenor from Pakistan government. If you have when in Sri Lanka, when Imran Khan gave that statement, and it was quite his tone was very different from what we have seen earlier, and that actually the first indication of some kind of progress or development, or at least actually what we could call it easing of tension, was very much visible when he said actually that what his vision, so-called vision about the subcontinent. So that was the first pleasant surprise and indication, some kind of indication that Pakistan will be ready for some kind of thaw in the relationship, and that it basically reminds me of Imran Khan's tone when he came to power, when he offered India for constructive engagement. And at the same, I think probably during that same period, over the last week or so, General Bajwa also gave a speech where he talked about a kind of normalization of situation. And then actually there was also some indication from Pakistani side, some Pakistani officials, that Pakistan will be more interested in geoeconomics rather than in geostrategy or geopolitics. So those were some kind of indication, or you can say the lowering of those rhetoric we have seen. So obviously there was something cooking up, or something was going on behind the scene, which we still don't know fully what really happened. I was reading a report by Nirupama Subramaniam the other day in the Express, where she mentioned about that there has been some direct contact between General Bajwa and Indian National Security Advisor Deval. I don't know how far it's true or not. Earlier there was some kind of rumor and speculation that Moeed Yusuf, our National Security Advisor, and an Indian National Security Advisor have met, which was categorically denied by Moeed. So certainly it could not have happened suddenly, or some good some morning they woke up and decided to go for a ceasefire. There must be some months of effort been into it. So what are the factors? But why this sudden change of? I think probably from Indian side, I think probably this development is certainly much more, I would say, positive for Indian government, because it could show the world that the situation in Kashmir is normalized and they are willing to talk to Pakistani. And for Pakistan, I think probably, yes, there was other compulsions too. You means long term, this constant firing on the line of control and constant tension would certainly was not very happy situation for Pakistan too. Particularly in this kind of situation where economy has suffered, hit badly because of COVID and because of other factors. Then the other thing is that I think there certainly are external factors too. Development in Afghanistan, there's no certainty now whether this peace agreement between Taliban and America, whether it's going to sustain or not. Then there's still no hope of some kind of political settlement being reached in the intra-Afghan talks. So these are the factors maybe which also encouraged Pakistan to go and to agree for ceasefire. But let's see actually, because still when they have agreed or when the announcement came, there are some speculation again actually that they will go for restoration of full diplomatic relationship. We had seen actually what happened after I think in February 2019 when diplomatic relations between were degraded. High commissioners were recalled. So first, any actually improvement or the changing of atmosphere, the indication would come whether they agreed to for the restoration of full diplomatic relation. The next step, actually, the SARC, forthcoming SARC conference, it has been postponed since 2016 because it was supposed to be held in, it was scheduled to be held in Pakistan, and India has been objecting it. So there has not been any summit level talk, SARC meeting since then. So again, actually, there's some speculation, mostly in Indian press. I've not seen anything in Pakistan, but Indian press, I was reading that India may drop this objection and to the SARC summit being held in Islamabad, and well, Prime Minister Modi may also come. So that will be a big development. But given the situation, I don't see this rapid development could be happening.
I do think it's interesting where you say that this suits India more than it suits Pakistan. On the other hand, Pakistan and the government have taken a particular stance, as you said, August 5th, post-August 5th, on India and Kashmir. How do you think that Pakistan should take it forward, given that things are sort of on the balance right now? There's a freeze at the moment in that kind of harsh rhetoric.
Are you asking me, Amber? Hello, Amber? Acha, sorry. Yeah, I think probably Pakistan, Pakistan would like actually to things to normalize, but there's also a kind of dilemma for Pakistan, because if they want actually the hostilities or tension coming down, the level of hostility. But on the other side, the basic thing is that Pakistan has been saying that they will not engage in any talk with India without actually India reversing its decision for unilateral annexation of Kashmir and revocation of Article 270 of the Indian Constitution. So it will be a kind of problem for Pakistan now to step back from that position. And we have not seen yet actually Pakistan dropping that precondition for any talk with India. So that will be the biggest test for Pakistan. Again, actually, what I feel, actually, I don't see any major progress taking place, but they will both sides will try to ease tension. And it will take some more time for them to engage in direct talks. There are basically problems on both sides. And as I said, actually, for Pakistani side, it's will be hard decision to take. That they will be engaging in direct talks and dropping its precondition. The other factor which could hinder this, the political situation in Pakistan itself. For a government like a stronger government or more stable government, it would have been taken have been much easier for that government to take any tough decision. And we have seen that in the past too. In 2003, this development was possible because military was in power. Musharraf was all powerful at that point. And there was also some kind of international situation was that. And also, don't forget about that, that also happened 2 years after a military standoff between the two countries. We have seen 2002, when the two countries had come very close to fighting another war. And then suddenly we saw the change of atmosphere. So that is the nature of India-Pakistan relationship, that suddenly some change comes and at the same speed it goes down. So it's very unpredictable situation. But I think probably what I feel that it may go slowly. It will not see any dramatic change in the situation, but it may continue. The easing of tension may continue for a while, and it will, I think, probably after something more happens, then we could see more changes.
Okay, so I mean, it's a big iceberg, and there's been a slight thaw at the tip, I suppose, Happymon. I think it's also interesting where India has consistently complained in the past about past governments that because the military and the civilian government were not on the same page, who do we speak to? That is not a problem anymore, clearly. And I think, secondly, the other question that I had is this more to India's advantage? Do you think, as Asfandyar speculated, do you think there's also a Middle East, country that may have been involved? And I know I'm throwing a lot of questions at you, but I would be interested in hearing your own response to this.
Right, Amber, give me a couple of minutes to sort of discuss the point that Zahid made. I think he made an interesting point about the ceasefire agreement suits India than Pakistan. Let me sort of put that argument slightly differently. I think the Indian side is approaching the whole ceasefire agreement from a position of strength. And allow me to explain what I mean by that. There are three arguments. One, I think Pakistan's gambit of internationalizing Kashmir has really not achieved much success. I mean, there are some countries who have really battled for Pakistan in international forums, but there has not been much success in that front. Point number one. Point number two, if you look at the history of India-Pakistan relations, Pakistan has always been very uneasy about talking about specific issues without touching upon, say, for example, Kashmir, or without having a comprehensive approach to things. Now, India has now managed, at least in this present agreement, what is happening? India has agreed to hold fire with Pakistan on the line of control without actually having a conversation on Kashmir itself. Now, as Zahid correctly pointed out, this may or may not be politically, saleable in Pakistan, but clearly, from an Indian point of view, this is an important achievement for the Indian side. A third point, I would say, is on the Kashmir question again. Now, supposing the two sides were to now decide that, hey, we need to also break the ice on the Kashmir question. Now, having done what it has done in 2019 August, which is two things. One, they have withdrawn the statehood from Jammu and Kashmir, and secondly, the government of India has withdrawn the special status to Jammu and Kashmir. India would, at this point of time, say if Pakistan were to insist and link the ceasefire to a conversation on Kashmir, India would say, listen, we are happy to come, till the middle line, right? What would be the middle line as far as the Indian side is concerned? India would say, all right, we will give back a statehood to Kashmir, but we will not return, say, special status. So if Pakistan is happy with that proposal, which I'm sure some Kashmiris would be happy with, some Kashmiris would not be happy with, but Pakistan would have to come up to the halfway mark. India is saying that India would come up to the halfway mark, which is the statehood. Would Pakistan walk up to the halfway mark? If Pakistan walks up to the halfway mark, theoretically speaking, that is actually going to be a win for the Indian side. I'm simply putting it, as arguments to suggest that India may be engaging in this ceasefire agreement from a position of strength. Now, coming to the two specific questions that you asked, Amber, I think this is absolutely true that traditionally the Indian side has made the argument that, hey, who do we speak to in Pakistan? Should we speak to Islamabad or should we speak to Rawalpindi? And now I think there's a clear answer. General Bajwa has been signaling for some time now clearly to the Indian side that, hey, if you want to have a conversation, I'm willing to have this conversation. He has, people have made this argument even in track 2 conferences, so that it can be communicated to the Indian side. So I think by reaching out to Bajwa directly, the Indian NSA has done the right thing, because there is a proper conversation that is possible, so that the message is not lost in translation when it gets translated from Islamabad to Rawalpindi. And the second question that you asked again about the whole third-party involvement, I am not so sure. I do not have any input on that. What I do know for sure is that there was some back channel parlays between the two sides, and this is really not something that is unheard of between India and Pakistan. Even the 2003 ceasefire agreement was preceded by a set of conversations between the then ISI chief and the RNW chief on the Indian side, and then it was communicated by the two DGMOs on the phone. So, and then of course you had the back channel continued on the Kashmir question. So there is a precedent to the two sides talking between two people who are really clued into the system. While I do not have any information on the third country part, I would definitely say there were back channel parlays.
Okay, all right. We also have with us now Ejaz, Haider, journalist, anchor, and I know that he's just finished recording his show. I'm going to come to you, Ejaz, because I know Asfandyar has been waiting for a bit, and I'm interested in asking him about. So temporarily, we now have a ceasefire, which shows the way forward. And I'm going to come back to that question because I'm interested. Does this hold until something happens in Afghanistan? What is your take on that? I think your mic is muted. Yeah.
Can you hear me now? So I'm more optimistic than Zahid Saab and Happymon on this lasting and this leading to a broader conversation on a set of issues. I'm not sure what those set of issues would be, and the reason for that is simple. I think as I mentioned earlier, India has run the course of its course Pakistan policy. In many ways, it has exhausted some of the options that hardliners in India would advocate. In instances of previous India-Pakistan, dialogue, interactions, times when things would go wrong, when there would be incidents of violence, I think those options are now mostly off the table. India has tried those coerced Pakistan options, and clearly they have not materialized. In many ways, India has, over the last 4 years, learned that its ability to coerce Pakistan meaningfully, especially without the US, is limited. I think on the other hand, Pakistan, as I mentioned, remains strategically constrained. Pakistan's economy is in shambles. I think Pakistan needs, Pakistan certainly has an important relationship with China, which has grown over the the last 5 years or so. But Pakistan is a massive country. It needs better relationship with the West, and therefore Pakistan will be nudged by Western countries, as I mentioned, some of these countries in the Gulf, towards a better relationship with India. So I think some of the structural factors have finally moved in the direction of keeping this conversation going for a period of time. But of course, untoward events like a terrorist attack can completely derail everything. But that being said, I see more willingness on the side of both parties to keep talking for a period of time, even if that leads to nowhere.
All right, Ejaz, Haider, thank you so much for sparing some time for this very important discussion, which, like I said, I feel like we haven't had much of in Pakistan. So Asfandyar is very hopeful. He says India's has run the course on we hate Pakistan, and Pakistan is responsible for everything. I think there's also another important question: how is it being seen in Kashmir? Both sides, whether it's Pakistan administered or Indian administered.
Well, firstly, it's not Pakistan administered, considering that I belong to that area, considering that we actually fought to liberate it. It's called Azad Kashmir. And I say this not as semantics or something, but I just wrote an entire article on how we use language and certain terms. And I think not just in terms of strategic communication, but also in terms of keeping things historically accurate. I think we need to be very careful how we use the term. Also, terrorism, for instance. The United Nations resolutions, UNGA resolutions, they're very clear about the fact that people under occupation have the right not only to armed resistance, but they also have the right to actually call upon external support. So these are, as far as the legalities are concerned, and as I said, it's not just mere semantics, these are historical facts, and we have to bear this. Also, it's important because, very frankly, for the last 25 years, the narrative has been captured, choreographed, presented by India. And unfortunately, not just the rest of the world, but also some people in Pakistan seem to have followed it hook, line, and sinker. And I think it's time that we begin to reshape the narrative. Now, as far as the ceasefire is concerned, look, I actually had a discussion about the ceasefire with Happymon on my show last week. Ceasefire along the line of control in itself is a good thing, because what happens? There's the idea of the vertical and horizontal escalation. Happymon has written a book-length, findings of how it works, and as I said on my program, also to the best of my knowledge, I don't think there's any other work that actually deals with it. So civilian casualties, soldiers dying on both sides, and frankly, it's more like, to put it in a banal kind of way, it's more like venting anger than adding to any tactical or strategic sort of input or gain. So to the extent that guns have fallen silent along the line of control, it's a good thing. The other question of whether this is a step towards something broader is, of course, an important one, but also one where we have to decide what the ultimate objective is. For instance, the Prime Minister has talked about a conducive environment. How do we define the conducive environment, and how does India define the conducive environment? Now, Happymon talked about the fact that India, if at all, at some point might say, okay, let's go back to talking Kashmir and let's meet halfway. Halfway meaning that we have unilaterally changed the constitutional status of that territory, and we are going to restore statehood, but not special status. Now, interestingly enough, And I think this is a point that we tend to either not talk about or frankly ignore. Kashmir's special status, there is a definitive book by A.G. Noorani on how this whole idea of the special status over many years by various Indian governments was hollowed out. It was a fig leaf that remained, and Mr. Modi's government removed that fig leaf. So that's one point. Secondly, as far as Pakistan is concerned, special status does not mean anything. I mean, we don't accept it. We don't even accept the instrument of accession, let alone special status. So what is our beef with this move? Our beef simply is that in the broader framework of where the dispute stands, this unilateral move is an expression of intent by the Indian government that it does not consider it a dispute. It considers it an internal part, and this is an internal administrative measure. And therefore, it has cocked a snoop not just at the UN resolutions, but also the bilateral arrangements. And I think that is something which is important. And that is something that we have to understand and appreciate before we move any further in the expectation that something might come out of this. Another important point for which there is more than ample empirical evidence. And it's not just in relation to Pakistan, but it is also in relation to the domestic politics within India. Mr. Modi and some of his lieutenants, most notably Mr. Amit Shah, are known to follow approaches with a very clear eye on electoral gain. One. Secondly, on more than one occasion, they have used violence or violent incidents to actually gain electoral popularity and votes. Whether it is the Godhra incident, whether it is the Akashar Dham incident, whether it's Uri, whether it's Pulwama, a number of incidents that one can cite, and they've been recorded by discerning investigative Indian analysts and journalists themselves. So while movement is important, because a stalemate doesn't work to anyone's advantage, the fact is that we have to be very clear about the position that we have taken. And that position is, we have to, not just India, but we have to, as two parties that are negotiating, have to go back to status quo ante. Because once you go back to status quo ante, then you create space. And it's not basically, and that's the deep irony of it. Going back to status quo ante is actually not a sort of, a climb up. It's actually the acknowledgement that the snakes and ladder that we have been playing with this particular move by the Indian government, we had fallen all the way back. And so before we begin the climb again, we have to acknowledge that this is something that needs to be reversed. Now it's entirely up to the Indian government how to do that. Now, once that happens, then of course, one can sit down and figure out, and again, there's deep irony in this, because up until 2007, lots of things had been figured out. Ambassador Riaz Ahmed Khan has written about it. It's been written about in India. It's been written by the former Foreign Minister Khurshid Kasuri and others, of where things stood and from where things could have moved forward in a certain way. But then President General Musharraf came under fire. On the other side of the border, the Dr. Manmohan Singh's government also became weak for many reasons, so it never happened. So all I'm saying is, just to recap, A, in and of itself, the ceasefire is good, but in and of itself, the ceasefire is not going to take us anywhere else. But if it's a first stepping stone towards something, then the first precondition is for us to go back to status quo ante and start building brick by brick back to where we had reached by 2007 in order for us to move any further.
But that's the point, you see. I mean, even this particular ceasefire, we're returning to what was essentially 2003. So, I mean, there's no really forward movement. It's something that's you know, it is welcome for especially civilians on both sides of the borders who risked life and limb and property.
More for our civilians, because as Happymon knows, he's been on both sides of the line of control. The Indians have been smart enough to actually push the villages back. Mostly
they're bunkers, exactly, bunkers as well.
Yeah,
they're bunkers
but our
as well.
villages are very, very close. Plus the fact that now the kind of multi-barrel rocket launchers that both sides have a shooting range of 90 to 120 kilometers. So how far back can you actually pull the civilian population back? So I'm saying that ceasefire itself is good. I mean, Happymon made a point on my program about the fact that both the 2003 one and this one, there's no formal written agreement. To which I said to him, I said, look, the misfortune is that there are a number of written agreements between the two sides that have also gotten violated. I mean, look at the visa agreement, and so where does it stand? So the point is that technically, yes, there is no written agreement, but frankly, even without a written agreement, if the two sides work in good faith, this unwritten agreement is probably going to hold longer than many of the formal agreements, which is not to say that there should not be a formal agreement. But what I'm saying is that given the tenor of relations and the deep mistrust on both sides, even formal agreements may not come to much.
So you're saying it doesn't really matter, but I think the internal politics is an interesting one that question that I want to pursue with, because as far as Pakistan is concerned, until the Modi government is in power, until the anti-Pakistan rhetoric continues, and it seems to be the sort of the philosophy of the BJP and the government in power, which is not in Pakistan. We don't expect much forward movement there either. There will constantly be elections. Pakistan has become very central to electoral politics in India, unlike in Pakistan.
I would say this, Amber, that if we were to focus on, if the Indians were to focus on personalities on the Pakistani side, their political proclivities, internal problems within Pakistan, how they win elections or they don't win elections, and you focus on the same on our side and we call each other and their leaders' names, I don't think we are going to get anywhere. I'm being pragmatic about it. I think we need to somehow be more clinical about approaching bilateral relations, and to that extent, I would say, I have not been a great supporter of the government's policy on Kashmir on a variety of issues, but I would still say that Mr. Modi, when he came to power in 2014, he pursued a policy of rapprochement with Pakistan, and there is enough evidence to show that. He did have a very sustained conversation with the then Prime Minister of Pakistan, Nawaz Sharif, on this. In 2015, he made a trip to Pakistan. It's a different matter that the Pakistani opposition probably did not like that. In 2016, after the Pathankot attack, Mr. Modi did invite the Pakistani investigation team to come to a sensitive airbase in Pathankot in Punjab to investigate, and a return invitation for the National Investigation Team of India was never received by New Delhi, and thereafter things started going down the drain. So I would say, if you look at the first year and a half or close to 2 years of Mr. Modi's Pakistan policy, it was a very proactive, positive policy towards Pakistan to create peace and stability in the subcontinent. I would perhaps say that even the current outreach to Pakistan perhaps is a return of Modi 1.0, and to that extent, I would say this is a positive way to go about it. But again, as both Ejaz and Zahid pointed out, that how far will Pakistan be able to pursue a tactical policy of a ceasefire with India without, of course, relating this to other outstanding issues. I think that is when it is going to be difficult for the Pakistani side. As I said earlier, and I firmly believe in that. As far as the Indians are concerned, the status quo ante is unlikely to be established. It's not going to be established. Forget about BJP government. Even if there is a new government in in India, they are unlikely to go back to status quo ante, which is returning the special status to Jammu and Kashmir. Again, as Ejaz pointed out, this was not really something that Pakistan historically has been very concerned about, right? Pakistan always looked at the Article 370 and said, "Hey, this is a hollow promise that you've given to the Kashmiris." So, I mean, if that is going to be a stumbling block, I don't think more progress is going to be possible between the two sides beyond a tactical measure called the Ceasefire Agreement. I think I'd leave it at that.
All right. I'd like to ask this similar sort of question about internal politics. Asfandyar is hopeful, and I want to hear your take on that. Whether you think there is reason to be hopeful. Zahid Saab.
Sorry?
Yes. My question to you about internal politics within India, politics within Pakistan, because you mentioned as well, there's a certain level of instability as well. Kashmir was taken up by the coalition of opposition parties as well. They've been kind of quiet on the ceasefire.
I think internal politics will certainly determine the future course. I mean, wherever it's not just about ceasefire. There has not been any opposition to ceasefire from any side from India and Pakistan so far. But certainly what happens next will be determined by the domestic politics too. In fact, actually, it will be difficult for Modi to step back from his position. And there's no indication as such that it could happen. Like, for example, I said earlier that for Pakistan, Pakistan has been saying that there cannot be any engagement with India without India reversing its decision of August 5, 2019. So that will be for Pakistan. The problem is that how Pakistan will justify any talks or engagement with India without some of the things happening from Indian side. Similarly, for India too, it's not, because rhetoric has gone too far, and for India too, actually, it will be not so easy to give to come down from its rhetoric, and particularly with the situation in Kashmir. So I think probably what the difference between today's situation and in 2003 is certainly the Kashmir situation. At this point of time, actually, we see, despite all those claims, India, the situation in Kashmir is not normal. It is actually like they have not been able to fully control the situation. Yes, actually, one can argue actually that that some of the steps taken by India, particularly because of the international pressure, give some kind of impression of normalization of nation, but it's not happening. We have seen actually that the killing of Kashmiris continuing, and I think that remains the major obstruction in the way of any constructive engagement between the two countries. So these are basically will also the domestic politics. For Pakistan, for example, tomorrow, if there was some kind of reporting in Indian press that India will drop the SARC, its objection for the SARC conference to be held in Islamabad. Well, if it happens, then if Mr. Modi comes here, well, how will he be seen in Pakistan as well as in India? So I think the situation is, that's why actually I'm saying, yes, actually this is a very positive development of ceasefire, because any easing of tension helps people. It helps actually the countries. But going beyond actually at this point of time, unless something dramatic happens, I don't think the domestic situation is also conducive for any change in the situation at the moment.
All right, we've reached sort of the end of today's roundtable. And Asfandyar, if you would like to give any closing remarks as well, because we've talked about it from a few perspectives. Do you think that this could also potentially open, at least if not formal structured dialogue, track 2?
Sure. So, an observation on domestic politics. So thinking about domestic politics as constraints, are Indian and Pakistani domestic politics, these days a constraint on meaningful engagement? I mean, certainly, I think Indian politicians, specifically, Prime Minister Modi's party, the BJP, has leveraged the salience of Pakistan amongst the Indian electorate for electoral gain. But it is also interesting that the way he has flip-flopped on the Pakistan policy, he's sort of done a total 180 from a coerced Pakistan policy to let's bring the temperatures down. That tells me that the domestic constraints, he doesn't really feel any domestic constraints in terms of how he engages with Pakistan. Certainly, it's the dial is in his control. He can take it towards coercion. He can take it towards engagement. He's really he appears to be a master of his domestic political destiny. At least in 2021. On the Pakistani side, it's also interesting that since the announcement of the ceasefire, despite the fact that the Hurriyat conference in the Valley has essentially protested or has expressed its disappointment at the announcement of the ceasefire, or the suggestion that there might be some kind of discussion, back channel discussion going on between India and Pakistan. No Pakistani opposition party, not even the religious political parties, have picked up the issue, and that's all the more surprising given that Prime Minister Khan is in the middle of a domestic political crisis of sorts. So, this issue can be in some ways weaponized against him, but Pakistani political parties for now have not picked up on this. So, in that sense, it also appears that Prime Minister Khan and his party are not constrained by domestic politics for now, at least. But certainly the situation can change if there's more overt engagement with Prime Minister Modi, or if there's a proposal to invite Prime Minister Modi to Pakistan for a SARC summit. I think things can change. I think the optics of more public interaction is a wild card of sorts. But that being said, I finally want to close on the US. I think the US has not been super involved until now, but I expect the United States government to to pick up the pieces, especially the Biden administration, to build from here on. The U.S. government has been extremely concerned about escalation between India and Pakistan since the Pulwama situation crisis. I think the U.S. government was not happy with the direction the situation went in. It did not like the fact that there was a nuclear scare of sorts. I think the United States government obviously wants Pakistan's help in Afghanistan to bring the conflict there to an end. But more important from a long-term, medium to long-term US perspective is that US wants India to focus on China. The United States wants India to focus less on Pakistan. The US government wants India to become a continental power and sort of pivot away from being a land power, always fending off its eastern border. So in that sense, I think the United States government is likely to seize this opportunity and press both sides to keep engaging and perhaps even bake in the price of some spoiling, some violence that might take place in the process.
All right, thank you so much, Asfandyar. And I think from there, I'll take it to you, Ejaz, for your last comments, because I think it's interesting. So the US would want Pakistan to focus on Afghanistan, and the US would want India to focus on China.
Right, so very quickly, Happymon talked about the fact that 2014, Modi wanted to reach out to Pakistan. Frankly, at that point, this entire thing was choreographed, and the very next day what happened, we know that in terms of that press conference and how that entire thing was sabotaged. And I was doing a program then, and frankly, Zahid was on my program, and I was the only one saying that the Prime Minister should not have gone. Perhaps the Speaker of the National Assembly could have gone there, because it was very clear that Mr. Modi was choreographing that. His pit stop in Lahore was a request that came suddenly. It wasn't official. There was some consternation on our side, but ultimately the then Prime Minister decided that that's going to happen. So as Asfandyar was saying, there have been these flip-flops, but I also completely agree with him that Modi can dial down or dial up things with reference to Pakistan as he wishes. The other important thing, which has to do with how we move forward from here and the US role. The US is very clearly concerned about escalation here. It has, at least to the extent that the kind of role that it has conceived for India, whether India retains its so-called strategic autonomy is a separate matter altogether, but the US is looking at India and preparing to provide goodies to India with reference to a certain role. And so it'll be entirely up to India to figure out. The United States needs Pakistan and Afghanistan. And to that extent, it would not want the line of control or the borders to remain tense. It's actually the same with reference to the line of actual control. And finally, I don't see Happymon. I hope he's there, because with respect to what he said about postalities, the fact is that there are certain postalities, and I can name you: Adolf Hitler, Mussolini, Trump, Ceausescu, Stalin. These postalities actually changed the very nature of the state that they were ruling. And similarly, on the right side of history, you have personalities like Mandela and others who have changed the course of history in many ways. So I think when Pakistan focuses on Mr. Modi, there are very good reasons for doing that, because Mr. Modi, or heaven forbid, if he is succeeded by Yogi Adityanath, it will have an immense impact on the very nature of the Indian state, on the very nature of the Indian constitution as conceived by Dr. Ambedkar, which was secular, inclusive, which was a Bill of Rights of sorts. So I think to that extent, if the world has started focusing on Mr. Modi as a person, well, frankly, Mr. Modi himself has to blame for that.
Mr. Modi is himself responsible for it. Happymon had to leave for an appointment, but Zahid Saab, if you'd like to make any concluding remarks, you've constantly said SARC could be a game changer. How likely do you think that would happen?
Well, actually, I don't see any hope of this thing happening. It will be a very dramatic change if Mr. Modi decides to come to Pakistan to attend the SARC summit. But how I can sum up the thing that yes, it is a positive development, but a big question mark whether there is still some kind of constructive engagement going between the two countries and at what level. So that may continue. I mean, we have seen back channels work, even continue, even in the situation which is, like even warlike situation, things that happen behind the scenes, some of the things. But I don't see any overt engagement between the two countries yet, unless there's some kind of change in the situation on the ground, which I don't see it happening. Well, actually, but I still see is a positive thing when guns go silent, even then actually, because it provides a conducive atmosphere for some kind of sanity to prevail, or maybe actually for the engagement, even back channel engagement. So that could happen, but it's a long way to go because so many things have changed since when this back channel diplomacy was being conducted under General Musharraf's term. It is no more the same situation. It's a much more difficult situation. The things have changed on the ground. There are so many other things. Well, somebody actually mentioned about there's no criticism of ceasefire agreement. I don't think that anybody will object to this when the gun goes silent. Well, actually, some people may actually may feel actually or may suspect something else is happening. So that's one of the reasons why this criticism from Hurriyat Conference has come. So so I think as far as the external pressure is concerned, well, actually, yes, there's a lot of things are happening in regional in geopolitics that always influence countries' politics and countries' policies. But there has been a mention about situation in Afghanistan, a new administration in the United States. Then we have also seen actually some kind of disengagement between India and China in Ladakh. So these are some of the things which are happening around us. How those development can influence change in the situation between India and Pakistan, that is hard to see. But yes, actually what I can see because of this changing geopolitics, that there's some kind of easing of tension between the two countries. But I don't have much hope of any major or dramatic change in their policies.
Right. Thank you so much, Zahid Hussain, Ejaz, Haider, Asfandyar, and of course, Happymon Jacob for giving us time. And thank you for all for watching as well. I was also reading some of your comments. Didn't get a chance to ask a couple of questions that came in, but thank you so much for commenting and for watching. Goodbye.
Thank you.